Our next session is about the maturing of Internet of Things, and I will invite on stage the session moderator, Rajeev Dubey, Managing Editor, Business Today, to kindly come and also welcome our guests, our esteemed panelists for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Avantika. Let me start with Rachna Nath. Rachna is the partner, digital consulting at KPMG India. Welcome, Rachna. Sachin Gupta, CIO at Havells. Welcome. Please. Vineeth Purushothaman, CIO at Fortis Healthcare. Welcome, Vineeth. Sridhar V, Group Vice President and Director, Honda Motorcycles and Scooters. Welcome, Sridhar. And S. Anantha, Sayana, Vice President and Head, Digital, L&T Construction. Welcome, Anantha. Thank you all for being here. IoT has been in the making for a good number of years, probably 6 to 7 years. What is it that's taking so long? Is it flattering to deceive, or is it finally here? Are we looking at an era of IoT in the making? Rachna, would you like to start with that?
Sure. So I think, IoT as a concept has been there, for a long time. So when we go to, let's say, speak to our clients who've largely been doing, production or in manufacturing, they say, look, I had sensors even before. So what has actually changed? And I think there are a few things that really have changed out there. One, the technology is obviously much, much more evolved. And the second is that with the advent of cloud, what has happened is that you can now actually have a lot of data on the cloud without spending as much. And if you actually had asked me, let's say a year back, how's IoT doing? Is it for real? I would have possibly paused and thought about it. Mm-hmm. But in the last 6 months, the number of proposals that we as KPMG have put in for our clients where there's serious money. And it's not like the client calling us and saying that, do a POC free of cost for me. Mm-hmm. One is that they are paying, and they are talking about, actually putting money out there to make things happen. Because, and I think all of us who've been in the technology industry, out here have seen the way ERP is gone. At one point of time, you really had to go and say, okay, why ERP? Today, I don't think that conversation is happening for digital and IoT. And I think there's some very, very serious use cases which have come up, and it's not very difficult to establish an ROI either.
Okay. Sachin, you would be among, I'm sure, the people who would be investing in this and putting in serious money, as Rachna says. Is it for real, and what's making you invest the kind of money? What kind of money is actually being put in?
So, Rajeev, honestly, the IoT is real, right? And as real as it gets. And I can say from experience, we today have connected products that are out in the market, both in terms of consumer and industrial products, right? Yeah. So it is here. If you asked, like Rachna was saying, if you asked this question a year ago, there was a lot of POCs done, a lot of products that failed for various reasons. Our IoT journey started about 2.5 years ago, where we first conceived the idea and said, fine, we wanted to go down this route and started planning that. And our first IoT product, we went live with first connected product, I should say, about 8 months, 9 months ago in the time frame. So now we have connected products, we have IoT products that are available. The journey is not easy, wasn't easy, but when you get there, it's very satisfying, and it's here.
Okay, Vineeth, is it for real?
Yes, it is for real. I'd put it in a way saying, it is. So there are enough numbers out there saying by 2020 the number of IoT devices will be equal to the population. Yeah. So on. So I would say over a period, over the last 5 years and so on, it's moved. The solutions have moved from sci-fi solutions to more practical solutions. Enterprise has moved from trying out POCs now getting on the ground, trying to hit the ground with some solutions. So there's been a great, there's a lot of work that's happened, and it has become more and more real and more practical as solutions, and that's why I believe it's very much real. As the discussion progresses, I'm sure there'll more we talk about it. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make it really workable and scalable. So
Right.
that's where we'll have to continue to invest on it.
Okay, so Sridhar, is it maturing at all, or where are we on the evolution curve of maturing of IoT?
Yes, as far as consumer applications are concerned, we are nearly touching the maturing portion, but we are not matured. There are a lot of things still which can come up.
Yeah.
But what I feel is the commercial and the industrial IoT. This is the area where I would say it's still in infancy stage.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things can be done. So if you see today, most of the applications are basically consumer IoT based applications. Nearly two-thirds of them are consumer IoT based, while the rest one-third is divided between commercial and the industrial IoT.
Right.
And in terms of potential, I feel that consumer of course has, but industrial IoT applications have great potential.
Okay, Anant, is it for real? Is it maturing? And where do you see it in the evolution curve?
Yeah, I think IoT, its day has come. And the reason I say this is that if you look at IoT, whether it is consumer IoT or industrial IoT, it has a number of components and technology pieces. What has changed today is that the technology pieces that constitute the entire IoT ecosystem have all come to a stage where you can rely on them and work on them.
Yeah.
From an industrial perspective, the sensor technology has been there for a long time to come. I don't think there's any problem with the sensor technology. What has improved is that you have the gateways, the networks, the ability of the networks to handle the streaming data that is coming from an IoT, the ability of the computing devices to compute the vast amounts of data that come from IoT, the ability of storage to store petabytes and whatever of data, and the ability of the analytics platform to take all the data that is coming every 1 second or 1 minute from any IoT and give meaningful results.
Yeah.
On all those layers of the stack, the technology has reached a situation where you can make it work.
Yeah.
But where the maturity needs to improve is to find the appropriate use case, define the business solution,
Yeah.
put it all together, and make it valuable for the ultimate consumer who is paying for it.
Okay, so you've sort of preempted my next question, which was about the consumer, commercial, or industrial IoT. We know they are about 1/3 each, broadly, but which industry, which of these three is actually taking the lead in rapid adoption and in terms of technological improvements as far as this thing is concerned? So Anant, you'd like to start? It's not a surprise that industrial IoT is taking off in such a big way.
No, I think it's every one of us in each industry to find the best use case. So one of the things that we are doing at L&T is that, what does my business want? Our objective is to complete an infrastructure project faster than before. And for completing an infrastructure project, we use a lot of machinery in our construction sites.
Give us some use cases. What is the most fascinating use case in your company?
So I'll tell you, so the use of construction equipment in our project sites is what helps us to complete a project faster.
Sure.
So I use machines to do a variety of things: lift loads, pour concrete, mix concrete, move loads, everything. So if all these machinery are able to talk to me, and that's our biggest use case of IoT, we've got a number of hundreds of connected machines from our field. I'm able to know remotely how are they performing, are they efficient, what is the amount of fuel that they're consuming, when did they start, what performance did they deliver, and how can I do maintenance on them.
And optimize it.
And optimize it, optimize the utilization, the deployment and everything, and therefore I can help my project teams to complete projects faster.
You're already putting this in place. This is what you're saying is actual root use cases on the ground right now?
Yes, this is the digital transformation journey that we are currently on.
Okay.
Our IoT program is on. We've got thousands of machines already connected, and we've got more to connect and get it into our system.
Okay, let me come to consumer companies. You know, Honda, Sridhar. what exactly, where are you deploying IoT in more meaningful ways than before? And then maybe Sachin, you could come in.
See, there are two. This one is in Honda. We have got a lot of machines which make parts, and then these parts are assembled to form the vehicles. So today, in a day, we produce, let's say, in a plant, we produce 2,200 vehicles.
Right.
So that means at a takt time of, in 1 minute, we produce 3 vehicles.
Yeah.
That is around 20 seconds, we produce a vehicle. So in case these machines stop, that means the line stops. So every minute, we lose 3 vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have done is we have connected all the machines to, the sensors were already existing, but basically the input from the sensors were not being captured in a center place. So we've got a SCADA software now, and this SCADA software actually captures all the inputs from the various sensors of the various machines. So typically it is, for example, like what's the bearing temperature, okay, so we get a lot of information, what is the coolant temperature, and so on. With this, it is possible for us to actually predict when the machine will go under a breakdown.
All right.
So this type of information is collected at a central place, and this information is analyzed. And once we know, for example, like we have got zones like green zone, yellow zone, and a red zone. So once the bearing comes into the red zone, that means it's going to wear off. So we do it's like a predictive maintenance wherein we can change the bearings well in advance so that we don't have breakdowns.
And you're saying machine manufacturers have already put in all those sensors in place?
Yes, machine manufacturers have already put in these sensors. Now we are connecting it to a SCADA system. We have already done the trials, and it's going to go on now. So that's one thing.
Consumers, yeah. So you have another example?
Yeah, the other example is relating to consumer, this one.
Okay.
Actually, Honda has launched an app, especially in four-wheelers, if you see.
Yeah.
There is an app called the Honda Connect.
Right.
And this app actually gives you details about when you want to get your car serviced. It gives you reminders. And it also gives you a lot of service tips.
Right.
So actually, Honda, in the business of mobility, we want to come as close to the consumer as possible. So this is one of the ways where we are doing it. Not only in four-wheelers, now we are also planning to do the same in two-wheelers also.
Okay. Sachin?
So in our case, we're doing both, right?
Okay.
We've got, just like Sridhar, we've got both pieces that we're tackling. From my perspective on IoT is a little different. I think the use case is what defines, or the need of the use case is what defines what kind of IoT you really want to do. So in industry, you're looking at what's my OEE, how can I improve my OEE, how do I prevent line from stopping, how do I protect maintenance, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one portion of looking at it.
Right.
When you start talking about consumer, you're now all of a sudden looking at a very different aspect of things. You're now looking at how do I make the consumer life easier, simpler? How do I proactively go and maintain the equipment that's there? How do I build a direct connect with my consumer? And a lot of FMCG companies, or in our case, in FMEG companies, historically we've not had a direct connect with the consumer because you work through a distribution channel, whether it's dealer or distributor. IoT is actually providing you a direct connect with the consumer that you now actually know, you have the data, you know, you would be able to know what do they prefer. You could go deeper into the homes and so on and so forth. So there are two very different aspects of IoT.
So you deployed more of it in manufacturing already, and the consumer end is still being put in place. Is that
other way around, actually?
Or is the other way around?
Right. So we've got our products out for consumer,
okay,
connected products. We're now actually moving down the path and seeing, so the machines have the sensors. In Industry 4, you start looking at how do you integrate machines and the computers and start getting the data out. So we're now playing with how do we use SCADA and PLCs to get the data out and then do predictive maintenance. Or
what's the most interesting product you have with IoT that enables?
that's like asking in the restaurant what is your best dish. They're all good, right? So from my perspective, all the products that we have are great products as
They
long
say
as
the
they're
most
providing.
expensive is the best, no?
No, that is always true, but for me, from the way I look at it, I've put enough blood and sweat in all of them that they're all great.
Give us some examples of how it is put in.
So some of our products that we have and some that we're working on, the ones we have is we've got IoT Lite. We've got, so with the acquisition of Lloyd, we also have an IoT-enabled air conditioner.
Yes.
Sorry, lost thought there. From Havells' perspective, we're coming out with geysers which are going to be IoT-enabled, and there are a few other products that are lined up, should be out in next quarter or so.
Interesting. Vineeth, healthcare is where this is of critical importance, and then again, do you actually need to take the patient's permission whether you're using IoT or not?
Of course, yes. But let me just take a step back. In the healthcare space, which I represent, the focus has now moved from the care piece to the health piece, right? So the most of the healthcare providers and the entire ecosystem is trying to work on the health piece more than the care piece. That has been conventionally true. Therefore, most of these use cases that has come across are more on the pre-hospital and the post-hospital care.
Right.
Which is very important, because in both these phases, it's the consumer who takes the call whether he takes a particular solution and uses it. It's important that as a healthcare provider, if you are there in both these places, it's good for you. A lot of us, I would say, as a use case example, we're still on the proof of concept phase. We've done a couple of pilots. We've done pilots on the hospital care as well. We looked at one of the pilot that we finished recently was around how do I put remote sensing devices onto a patient and let him off the intensive care unit, because there is a mental stress that persons go through where the more they stay in the intensive care unit. So if we can take them off into a normal environment, he heals faster.
Okay.
So that's one place where we have tried out a solution. Important that any of us who goes through this has to address 2 or 3 elements before you actually would step into this. The first one obviously is most talked about is the culture element, the second being technological, and the third being objective. Cultural, very important that you need to be ready, because in this case, are your employees ready for it? I mean, the consumers may be ready to take up a solution. Are your employees ready for it? Are you ready to look at a different business model altogether? It's very important that you address all these questions before you jump into it. The technology piece is pretty easy, I guess, but these are very important to be addressed.
And the question of whether you need to take patient's permission to use IoT,
so
is that's what in AI it seems that if you're using Watson, you are supposed to take the permission.
So consent, the consent goes definitely with anything, irrespective of IoT. If I were to use any data of anything of that patient, obviously I need to have the consent. The only thing that I was started off by saying is if it is in the pre-healthcare and the post, it's more a person's choice of enrolling to a program or using a particular device than in the in-hospital care. In-hospital care, obviously everything happens with the consent.
Sure. Rachna, you heard this. Consumer, commercial and industrial. In your view, which is the one that's moving the fastest, and where is it that who is feeding on whom in this whole chain of use of IoT?
Sure. I think, you typically, when you look at digital, and we've been talking about it a lot, there are 3 or 4 very critical use cases at a very high level. The first is when you're talking about consumer experience. And wherever you want to, have control over how your experience with the consumer is looking like, that's where, we are seeing a lot of consumer IoT come in. In fact, even if you're looking at, and I don't know how many of you are from the automotive industry, but, the automotive sales over a period of time is going to go down because, of the shared economy. And one of the conversations which is happening is that how do I make sure that once my car leaves the showroom, I can sweat my asset to bring in more service revenue. So when you start talking about consumer, IoT, there are a lot of these kind of use cases which is happening. I think the biggest flip that I've seen in the last 6 months is actually on the industrial IoT side. And I think 3 areas where it's, being applied a lot. One, we've already talked a lot extensively, is any industry which is asset heavy. So talk about energy, natural resources, industrial manufacturing, even for consumer companies, the production side of it. But I think 2 more use cases, places where we are seeing a lot of conversation happening, and actually we are doing projects also, one is on the digital supply chain side. Okay. So if I was to take an example where we are working with one of the fragrance and flavoring companies out here. Now, if you typically look at flowers, which go into fragrances out here, that farm to the factory itself, that supply chain, when you're talking about a fragile thing like a flower out there, the wastage is immense. Yeah. How do I use something like an IoT on my supply chain to be able to track that how does that entire thing move right from the farmers to my factory by minimizing the thing. The second that we are seeing is largely also on the agri and the horticulture side, where we are talking about in India where 40% of my vegetable produce, 60% of my fruit produce, my what I get prawn sericulture and all of that goes waste out here. How can I make sure that apart from creating warehouses, I'm actually moving goods in a manner where I can get it to the market much faster? Mm-hmm. And I've seen that happen, actually crash from 3 days to 3 hours. Okay. Because of application of something like that. The third area that we are seeing a huge conversation happen is actually around the safety and manpower productivity. In fact, we have an offering for a client, we call it the Ghost Factory, where we are saying that, do you really need to open another factory? Or the one that you already have, I can run it more efficiently and add, much more capacity to that factory itself. So taking an example, let's say you need 3 people to start a machine. After lunchtime, one guy comes at 1:10, the other comes at 1:20, the third one comes at 1:30. And where the machine was supposed to go up at 1 o'clock, you're actually having it go up at 1:30. Right. Right. So can I actually reduce that? And then we did it for one of our clients. We were so surprised. Only 25% of the time of that manpower was productive. Okay. 25%. Mm-hmm. 40% was actually going into effort for looking for the supervisor. And actually not even 40%, 30%, and 50 to 40% of the time was him taking a call, him going loitering around and all of that. Now that 40 to 50% you can't get it to 0. He will have to take a break, he will have to, go and take a call. But then how can I get that 30 to 40%, which is that yellow area, much more productive? Mm-hmm. And how can I change that 40 to 50% to 20%, let us say that. So I think another third area, we've talked about asset management, we're talking about, so digital supply chains and manpower productivity side, where we are seeing a lot of these applications now starting to happen in the industrial IoT side.
How is it being used in the media industry? What's the best use case you've come across, or would you charge consultancy for that?
No, we just, published a book called On Digital. That's largely on the media side, because media is a lot about digital. Mm-hmm. But as far as IoT in, sort of media is concerned, I think it actually gets into the privacy area the moment you start talking about on the consumer side, because you're talking about, content shift and, time shift out there. And you're starting to talk mobile devices, you're starting to talk about, a lot of these mobility solution, part of it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, not really so much as IoT, but obviously the digital marketing side of it. So, you're hearing a lot of companies like Google actually, just say, okay, give me all your media spend and see, how much I can give you the bang for the buck.
So is that more data mining, data analytics, or is it more
IoT? In fact, that's another point that I wanted to talk about. Yeah. We are actually talking IoT in just isolation. Yeah. But, the proof of the pudding is actually in eating this. Today, I'm working with factories which have...
so it leverages that data?
No, it has machines which are 40 years old. Yeah. And, 40, 50 years old. Yes. And I've been able to retrofit sensors into those machines. But within the campus of that particular factory, I'm able to take a lot of data to the cloud. Now what? Mm-hmm. And that data is not just IoT data, that's a MES data, there's a SCADA system, there are others, which are actually on paper. How do I get it all onto a platform and start making sense of the data is where actual proof of the pudding is.
Interesting, that because I met ABB recently, and they are actually setting up a whole factory around IoT devices, full of IoT devices.
The smart factory
The
concept.
smart factory concept. Okay, now this is typical of any industry in its inception. You have, and it's happening in IoT as well. You have many devices and many platforms, no standardization, either of firmware or the OS. So let me start with you again. You just finished, but we just start with you. Where are we on standardization of firmware, and then let's see how companies are dealing with that chaos.
Okay, so I think I can say we are almost there, but the goal keeps on shifting. So you have this entire area in my mind is so cluttered at the moment. You see everybody now starting to not only own a sensor, they're starting to own a platform, they're starting to own a first level of, let's say, analytics as well. So there are multiple platforms which are being created. There are multiple, protocols which exist in the market, and we are starting to see a lot of consortiums being formed. I think we are still a bit far away from getting to that kind of a standardization. But in my mind, any industry that we've seen, and it happened with the financial industry in the 90s and the e-commerce and all of that, at some point of time will plateau out.
Sure.
It'll actually, and one of my favorite stories as far as, you have a session on cyber later on, is actually in all of this, we missed the security part of it. But I don't know how many of you know, very recently a few hackers got into the core system of a casino through an aquarium.
Oh. Okay.
Excuse me, I mean aquarium. The aquarium actually had a IoT device which was managing the temperature of the water. So when we start talking, standardization, we start talking protocols, there's still a lot of work which needs to be done because, you are having to do it right from the sensor to the security, if I was to use.
Is there anybody taking a lead in this already?
A number of, companies and platforms which are coming together, which is good news. But I think we will still take some time to get to, that conversation where we say, okay, there are, 2 or 3 platforms on which this entire thing is standardizing. And I think it is all the more complex because when these, IP standards and all of them were made, let's say 20 years ago, there were not so many people experimenting. Today, just look at the, number of players and platforms which are there. So getting it together is going to take time.
Okay. Anant, how do you make them talk to each other? What kind of chaos does it cause on the shop floor?
I think a certain amount of diversity is inevitable. For a day to come when you expect that every sensor will stock the same millivolt and the same protocol is probably not going to come.
Yeah.
And the second layer on the telecommunication layer from the gateway to the cloud, again, there are 4 or 5 protocols. That standardization is slowly beginning to emerge. And once you come from there into the analytics layer, it's common computing software, so you can manage it. And the way the ecosystem is developing, and if I'm a large OEM manufacturer of a certain equipment, now I would prefer to put my own proprietary sensor, my proprietary gateway, my proprietary portal. Just imagine a very consumer scenario. I have a Honda car, I have a BMW, I have a whatever. And each one of these car systems have their own portals. And if and you could extrapolate this to anything, right?
Sure.
I have machinery from 100 suppliers, and each supplier says, I've got my own portal and come into it.
So how do
now
you
I'm a common user, and where is that integration going to take place?
So
for some time, we're going to see walled gardens exist, because that is what OEMs are going to do. But at some level, the end user, because the final consumer, whether he's industrial or an individual, is going to demand the convenience. And you're seeing work for integrators who are wiring up an intelligent home. So if you're wiring up an intelligent home, and I'm building a home that has all the components of the home connected, there could be a bulb, it could be a refrigerator, it could be everything. And so they will all remain separate, but there is work for an integrator to bring an integrated scenario where I don't care how your sensor in the refrigerator or the washing machine is talking to that gateway and coming into the Wi-Fi, but I will do the integration and do that. That's how I see it emerging.
So Sridhar, integration is one way of dealing with it. Are you also facing pressure from the suppliers to say that, okay, you be in my ecosystem. And how are you coping with that?
Yes, actually, see, there's a good example which he gave of that of a home. See, one problem is, for example, let's say for everything we have an app. Let's say we have a light app, then we have a temperature app, okay? So if the light app does not talk to the temperature app,
Correct.
or the temperature app does not talk to the security app,
Yeah.
so what's going to happen inside that home? So it's really a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the most important thing is, it is important to standardize this, but it's very difficult to standardize, and we are far away from the standardization thing. However, there are other things, for example, now like you've got, let's say, Facebook or Twitter, and this can be operated either on Google or iOS.
Okay.
Okay, so this gives better customer experiences. So if people can devise products, okay, which can work on different platforms. So I think that can be one way by which it can.
So those ecosystems are beginning to capture the devices. Vineeth, it's a question of life and death as far as patients is concerned. Again, from your point of view, and if they don't talk to each other, it's an even messier situation.
Yeah, it's a disaster. It is indeed a matter of life and death. So I agree with most of these panelists, but we are at a state in this particular in the IoT space where you can't wait for that nirvana to be there where you can start trying out.
Okay.
So you have to be in this space because you cannot wait for 2020 to happen and then try out or go live with solutions. So as I say, I see a lot of work for integrators to come in and crack it. Remember, the entire open source technology is definitely in that space because you're continuously evolving, continuously changing. If anything new happens, there is somebody or the other fixing it. So it's not impossible to definitely build integrators. Yes, it will be an extra effort. It will not be seamless as we would love to have. So I would say there will be a lot of work done, whether it's healthcare, otherwise, because we also have a Samsung device, a Philips device, and various other devices. They don't easily talk to each other, but there are reminiscences of a protocol coming somewhere where you can actually connect them and ensure that we are keeping the patient safe.
Sachin, how are you dealing with this whole tussle?
So Rajeev, I think, and I have a little different perspective, right? When you're looking at, so there are 2 or 3 integrations that you have to do. When you truly look at the journey of an IoT device, you have to really start from a sensor bit that then you have to think about a use case on the sensor. You have to take the data, then you have to figure out how that data is going to talk to the mobile device. So things like MQTT and all that protocols come into place. Then you have to think about how that data is going to go from your IoT device all the way to the cloud or on your data center. Then what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to generate, like Rachna was saying, analytics out of it so you can add business value? So there are a lot of moving pieces. And in year and a half that I've been doing it, it is very difficult to find somebody who's cracked it end to end, right? The biggest problem that a CIO has and why a lot of IoT projects failed initial on is most of the people that come to you and say, we have an IoT solution. They only talk about the platform, right? So, which is the easiest thing to have, right? Nobody talks about how the testing is going to happen, how the product's going to build, what will be the circuitry in the product, what is the voltage you need, what is the chipset that's going to go, what are the use cases on this chipset, and then you have to mess around with creating a mobile app, right? And as one of the panelists was saying, all of a sudden you realize that you've got 15 different mobile apps for 15 different products, and now there's another spanner. So people like Amazon is coming out with Alexa, right?
Yeah.
In very short span of time, your consumers are going to start asking for, and that's my belief, that hey, I already have an Alexa device. I want to control my Havells device with an Alexa device.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want a Havells app, right? And so you'll have to create a platform or integrate your platform with various other platforms. So all these devices that are in a home could work together. You could still control industrial IoT to a certain extent, but when it gets to consumer IoT, it becomes very difficult. So that is posing another challenge. And honestly, jury's still out. We're all trying to swim against the tide and keep our heads above water to see how fast we can We can, and technology is so changing so fast that a decision you make today is obsolete already tomorrow, right? So it's a great question. I haven't seen one person who can come and say, hey, you come to us, and then on the other side, you start, you're now working, and you've got Chinese players that have got IoT in a box. They come to the business, they sell it, and we as a CIO say, no, 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 you can't do that. And all of a sudden, business comes back and says, it's going to take you 4 months, 5 months. These guys can take us product live in 2 weeks. And there's a lot of challenges, security, so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So it's a difficult world out there.
Yeah.
Nobody said it was easy, but it still is. And the challenge is out there. So hoping that there will be somebody that can come back and say from India, I have the sensors, I have the device, I have the use case, I've got mobile application. We can go from a use case to launching a product in 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Right.
I still have to see that.
So that's what takes time to
That's what
build a
takes
product around an IoT. Rachna, you want to add something to it? Or
No, I'm actually, while he's talking about this, and there's this case, I talk about it very often, about BMW and Apple. And, BMW and Apple decided to, have a sort of a partnership where the inside of the BMW, the experience would be Apple experience. The entire thing possibly fell through because they didn't know who would own the customer.
Sure.
So while you're talking about a smart home, and the smart home has multiple things, let's say from a Samsung, a Bajaj, a Havells, or somebody, and you're providing a smart home, who owns the customer?
Right.
Who owns the customer experience out there? So while we're talking standardization, there are 10 other things which actually, create that complexity.
Yeah, so, you mentioned customer, so let me move to the customer. The ownership of the customer by the company is one issue. Ownership of the data that the customer generates, it eventually boils down to data, right? That's what you're saying, essentially. So ownership of that data within the country is another aspect. And many countries are beginning to say that data stays here, like China, and China is building a whole ecosystem around its data. So data being the new oil, what do you make of where this is headed? Is it going to be, nations trying to build walls around their own data, and companies themselves then trying to build walls around their data? Then where are we headed?
Look, I think, none of us can provide a solution, in the panelists out here. But my little advice to anybody out here is start small. First, care about your own data.
Yeah.
Until unless you are a global company, where you might have data in multiple geos. And there was a case, I think, recently in US where the lady actually filed a case, and that company had the data in Ireland, and the company came back saying that, okay, because the data is in Ireland, sorry, you can't file, we can't have it, go back to you. So I think that discussion will take its own time, but typically if you see the large cloud companies today, they've understood this complexity and they're building huge data centers in India
within
itself.
Countries, yeah.
Because most of the financial data is the one that people are saying will not flow out of this country. And while nobody like from an IRDA or everybody says that you can't have data, out on a public domain, but nobody encourages that. So I think from seller side, most of these companies are starting to have data centers in India itself. But I think, we need to be extremely conscious about the use of this particular data, because with anything which falls in a gray area can be interpreted both ways.
Sure.
So you don't want to be in a situation and litigation where, you're just fighting a case because, and you're asking him about use of IoT.
So
thing, I'm sure they have a clause when I sign a thing and get into the hospital which says I can use your data. And I don't see the fine lines possibly.
Yeah, so the consent form, yes, it definitely, that's what it talk about. So
whose data is it?
It is the customers. It is
the customer's data,
of course. So
residing with you.
So yeah, we are the custodian. I would
the
look at it that way. So you can't obviously, that's true for any healthcare provider or any enterprise. So it's very true. So it's not going to be easy. So the moment, there are two paradigms. One is that you wish to be on the cloud. That what gives you the agility. But at the same time, being on the cloud, when you talk about cloud, you're not talking about this is the server in which my data is sitting, right? That's not the idea. So the moment you go onto the cloud and then you bring in these rules and things where regulations where you say the data has to reside within the country, it makes things difficult. Yes, the providers have got the data centers in India, and because healthcare also falls in that space where you're not supposed to keep the patient data outside the geographical boundaries. In our case, most of us, I don't know, we started to invest in the EMR, the electronic medical records, which is where the actual data gets digitized and gets stored.
Yeah.
As of now, it's all very much within India.
Okay.
We have not moved it on the cloud exactly for the same reason.
Okay.
But I'm sure at some point of time, you will have to make certain decisions and keep some data there.
Okay.
In the data that we talk about, again, there's something called as customer identifiable information. There are then, I'm sure these are all fine lines and fine prints, but if you get to, but then it very clearly says if you can hold the customer identifiable information very safe. Because if it's an image, if it's a radiology image of an image, it's very difficult to identify these images of a Vineeth or a Sachin unless there's an information on it. So that is also a way to protect. So ensure your customer identifiable information, though that's kept very much within the geographical boundaries.
Sachin, your device, your app on iOS platform, whose data is it?
I would certainly say mine.
But iOS will say it's
Havells will say, when I say mine, I mean Havells, obviously. But it all, so I think the question in my mind today is not about as much as whose data, right? As long as it's on my server, it's my data. Or our platform sits on Azure. So as long as it's in my custody on Microsoft platform, it's my data, right? So the bigger question is, how do I protect it, right? Rachna touched upon security a little bit, right? Security is so vast. How do I protect the data, and how do I make meaningful insights out of that data to use it proactively to benefit the organization? I think that is where we're grappling. That's our biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I think.
So the security part I'm coming to.
Right. So I'm now.
So anything else?
What I was saying is, whose data I don't think is such a big question right now, but what to do with it in my mind is a bigger question.
Data ownership, Anant and
I think what the conversation is taking us to is actually the value of the data.
Exactly.
If you look at any equipment that you manufacture, whether it is an air conditioner or a car, and this whole question of personally identifiable data becomes a little vague and hazy when the data doesn't pertain to a person but to a device, and that device is sending out the data. Just take for example an air conditioner which is IoT enabled, and let's assume that there is a manufacturer who is manufacturing millions of air conditioners, and these air conditioners are sending out data about what are the normal times when they are getting switched on, what are the normal temperatures that they are being operated upon, how often do they operate, in what conditions. All that data is going back to the manufacturer, and that manufacturer has got an analytics engine who can optimize the air conditioner to those temperature ranges and the times that they are working and bring down the cost of manufacture. It's useful IoT data which is actually coming from consumers but is benefiting the corporation that is manufacturing the air conditioner. Now, does the individual consumer who is buying the air conditioner have a say in the matter? Does he get it back in the form of some way? These are questions that don't have any answers. And as Sachin said, a person who can monetize and use the data will find that eventually the data is more valuable than the cost of the machine that he produced itself.
So regulation, like in every other case, is way behind the industry and the evolution. Sridhar, you have any thoughts? Should we move on to the next?
I agree with most of the panelists. I think whatever Sachin has said, I think it's more relevant in the sense that, for example, whosoever's data it is, okay, how can I use this data and how can I get the benefit out of this for the organization? That's one point. But the more relevant point is, how can I use this data to give benefit to the customer or the end user who's using it? Now, the biggest problem is whether it is a car or a motorcycle or any this one. The point is the device is being used by multiple users. So today, the identity of the user is basically it should not be device based. It should be actually identity based. So we should move away from the device identity to the person identity who uses it.
But the question is, are we in a position to actually use the kind of data overload that's coming? Rachna, let me start with you. They're saying there's going to be something like 21 billion devices in 3 3 years from now of IoT devices, it's going to be an information overload, home, wearables, smart cities, utilities, logistics, traffic, healthcare, retail, and these are just a handful of them. Are we in any position to leverage this data, to use this data in any meaningful way, or this is going to be another mess on our hands?
No, I don't think so. I think in my mind, we make too much out of this because we are never going to manage 20 billion devices, as an organization or as an individual. I think from an organization perspective, it is very important to be able to, first of all, understand what outcome do I want. And that outcome can be in 3 or 4 areas. The first is revenue enhancement. So if I am getting this kind of data, how can I use that data from a revenue enhancement perspective?
Sure.
Second is your customer proximity, and the customer can be you and me who's going to buy even a toffee or something like that, to a farmer, to anybody like that. The third is on the operation efficiency side, that and we talked a lot about asset management out here. I talked about, let's say, your digital supply chain or the manpower productivity. And the fourth is more from a, let's say, a risk and security perspective. So while there's a huge amount of data, and we get a lot of questions from CEOs of companies and CEOs, and mind you, digital in today's world is not something which is in the realm of CIO per se. Right. It's a business issue which you really want to resolve. So I think there's a huge amount of data. They come back to us and they ask us, okay, I have so much of data, what can I do with it? So our first advice to them is first let us discuss and decide what are the outcomes that you really want. So from a Salesforce perspective, you want productivity to increase. You're from a, even from a marketing perspective, do you really want to know who next to, sort of target and sell to? Or you really want to, take cost out from your operation? Let's decide on that, and we will see how do we model the data for you. So I don't think let's get into...
It's going to be used in pockets and to whatever use you can put it.
Yeah, don't get into the complexity of 20,000 devices. I'm never going to own them.
Sure.
Right, but whatever I own, let me see what I can get out of it.
Yeah, Sachin, what will you put your data to use to?
I think in addition to what Rachna said, there are a couple of pieces that a manufacturer of a consumer company can look at. So I think Anant alluded to that. When you're in, so he alluded to AC data coming in, right? We also have for example, connected fan that we have. Those devices provide you phenomenal amount of data in the sense that what is the impact of the environments on the device, right? Which you can really take back to quality and to manufacturing to see how you can produce a better fan. Or localization of the device, right? Can the fan that is used in Bangalore versus in Delhi,
can they be different?
Can they be different, right?
Sure.
How do you enhance the life of the product, right? On the consumer side, you really want to look at how do you glue to the consumer by using that data, whether it's from a proactive servicing or creating a channel of revenue out of the services. So those are the two aspects that you could seriously use the data for, and then see how you can take competitive advantage.
Almost like what FMCG companies are doing. Should we have less spicy in south, or more spicy in south and less spicy in north? Vineeth, how would you put data to use?
Yeah, so again, I agree with both of them. So the data in my case, in the health case has got two parts to it. One is that there is a lot of data that I'm going to use of the patient to help the patient, because that's a direct. I'm using data to put through a pattern to come out and say how you're going to get well, how you're going to get better. So that's one use, which is what an artificial intelligence solutions or cognitive intelligence like the IBM Watson and the other solutions put to use. There's another part where some of this data is also going to be used to generate revenue, which could be new business models and things that come out. That's where what I mentioned as the customer identifiable information comes very important. That there you don't touch the customer information. You just look at patterns. So you look at patterns to say when does a dengue outbreak happen, and what happens before a dengue outbreak. So in which case you're helping the society, you're helping obviously driving look at your revenue as well. Both are aspects. So yes, the data would be looked at both these ways, and I agree with Rachna saying that most of the time it is the data points that you want to look at.
Sure.
Once with the data points and the outcomes,
you know how to utilize
you just scale. Your systems
Yeah.
are ready to scale, and
Yeah.
whether it is billions of records, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Anantha and Sridhar, anything you'd like to add?
Let's say, let's take an example of a connected car, what we are saying. So the data which is required is approximately 20 GB, which is quite heavy, I should say. Yeah? And the point is, what data is really required? And even before the car really gets connected, this much is the data requirement. So what data is required at what point of time and to whom it should go? So that is very important. Now, actually, in our industry, if you see, one is, let's say we take insurance for cars or motorcycles. Currently, the insurance method of calculating insurance is based on your age, gender, and so on. It's a bit random, actually. It does not depend on your driving habits. So today, in fact, you can use this one device which can be fitted to the car, and you can actually see as to how the person is actually driving, whether he is driving safe, whether he accelerates or decelerates too much, and how, for example, how many times he brakes, and how he avoids traffic, or how he is able to weave through traffic. So with this, there is something called usage-based insurance, and this may be coming up slowly, and this is already catching up. So maybe the insurance companies will use this for this.
They're already putting cameras on dashboards to understand this behavior.
That's right. Yeah. The other thing which I already said was we have got machines. In fact, how do we enhance the productivity of the whole system? That's another thing which I had explained earlier. We have machines which are connected through sensors, and they are connected to the SCADA system. But what important thing I want to say is, see, data is available in plenty. Like our fellow panelists have also said, that which data is required, at what point of time it is required. So the most important thing is, I think the analogy should be connected to the human brain, because human brain collects a lot of data, it processes lots of data, but finally acts on only some of them. So it should be something similar.
Anant?
Yeah, I think the world's ability to handle data is not going to be in doubt. The fact that we are all under a data overload shouldn't be a matter of great concern. I think for all practitioners who are implementing IoT analytics solutions, the metric is not the amount of number of petabytes or zettabytes of data that I've collected, but the insights that I can get from it. From a very IoT perspective, what IoT has enabled is that when you put IoT on the field, you're getting data that you did not get before. And so if you use the data to get insights that you did not have before, and use that insight to drive a better business outcome, then the whole effort is worth it.
Okay, we just have enough time to go for the trickiest issue involving IoT devices. Rachna, these are essentially really dumb devices, and you gave an example of one where it was possible to break into the network through. Most of the IoT devices of today are by and large very dumb. It poses a security challenge. How is it being dealt with? How is it being?
I think when I talk to my own clients, sometimes I think they don't get it. The risk that these kind of networks and devices can put you to. Because we do a lot of digital strategy work for clients, and when we say, why are you not thinking security, they say it's not important. And then I take those examples that I already sort of gave out here. So I think as any other security, where you actually plan for that contingency happening once. You're not talking about breaches which happen every day. So I don't know how many of you actually heard of the ransomware attack. I think most of us would have. I'm just hoping that nobody actually was asked for the bitcoins also as ransom out here. This was a once in a time incident. I think my suggestion to people out here really is that when you are starting to talk IoT, start looking at your own security as well and take it seriously. And it's not a consultant's view, only. These kind of devices put our data to huge amount of risk, and you again don't want to be in that gray zone about who owns data. Oh, I gave you my data, it should have been secured with you. I think Sachin, you mentioned that point out here, and then fall into an area that you can't even secure my data. How will you even care about me? So it has a lot of incidences. I think, you know, anybody who's getting into these kind of systems, forget about regulation, forget about any other thing. By the end of it, we are answerable to our clients. It is important for us to make sure that we create secure systems.
Okay, Sachin, how do you secure your vulnerabilities?
I think, when you look at the data security, or security, I should say, you have to look at security at various different areas within the IoT life cycle. You have to look at, and I think most vulnerable and most neglected are actually the sensors or the devices, right? So you would need to make sure that the firmware on those devices is not open, it's not upgradable, things like that, which creates another challenge. You have to look at the communication between or how secured the routers in the homes are, because that could be another problem. You have to look at the transport layer when data is actually moving from the device to the cloud. Then you come at looking at the cloud or data center security. So it's not one piece of security or at one level that you're looking at. You have to actually look at end to end, and it's so many things to look at. It's very difficult today. The attitude, like Rachna is saying, in a lot of cases is jab hoga dekha jayega, right? What I don't know is what I don't know. But I think that needs to change. People need to get serious about that, because the day when it hits, it's going to hit hard. And especially as the devices start going into billions, right? Things like zero-day attacks and DDoS attacks are going to make our life miserable. It's going to be so much power that it will bring the internet down. So we'll all have to think about it. It's not one person's job. Everybody collectively will have to think about it.
Yeah, so I'll take it from where Sachin left off. You could prepare your technology and networks for everything, but zero-day attacks are always going to be there. Sure. So you have to of course put the security perimeters and whatever in place to safeguard. So the aquarium discussion of whether it's a printer, there are stories where the attack happened through a printer. Sure. So all these are, you know, in our case, like I said, there is biomedical devices and there are the other technology devices. As the EMR and other gets implemented, these devices will have to talk to each other. The moment they talk to each other, anybody could enter through one of those radiology devices and end up in it. All over, which is why we build perimeters. We create subnets and otherwise and create to differentiate. There's also one more piece to it, which is what we do at Fortis, is that while we are on a journey of digitization, data is not just digital. There is a lot of data lying around in forms and papers around, which is where a lot of work has to happen on the employee awareness. Right. So there is a larger piece that we also work on awareness, building awareness as to why is it important to lock your device before you leave? Why is it important that you don't share passwords? Very simple things, which is also, I see it as a very important aspect. While you invest in technology, while you invest in the best of technologies to safeguard your endpoint devices, it's also important that you work with the employees and educate them on how to keep the data safe.
Okay, Sridhar?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, at our organization, we'd like to keep things very simple. That means, as far as I think security is required at all levels, whether it's in the devices or it's in the cloud, okay. So what we're saying is, as far as users are concerned, it's important that they don't share passwords, and we make strong passwords and so on. But the more important thing is, whatever security-related patches which come, these are not normally updated on the systems, and this can also be one of the reasons as to why things get
breaches happen,
and there are security breaches.
Okay.
So these things need to be taken care of. Apart from this, there are other systems, like for example, how do we do an IoT audit of your system, and at what frequency you do it, and how it is possible for you to find problems in these IoT audits. The last thing which I want to say is, actually most of the time when all devices get obsolete after a period of time. But what happens is we just throw these devices off. But there is a great risk because a lot of data gets compromised when we just throw it off. So we don't have a policy or principle as to how these devices should be treated once they become obsolete.
Okay, Anant, last word.
IoT definitely increases another dimension to the entire security problem. Every IoT device is one more endpoint that you have added to the network. And whatever care you take about an endpoint,
the more you have, the worse it is.
The more serious answer to the question of IoT security is in architecture, So the way you architect your systems, the way you island the more critical resources of data and take it as a whole picture rather than I'm doing an isolated IoT initiative and I'll connect them to the main system. If you look at architecture more seriously, and I think we will build better IoT security.
Okay, with that, let me thank you all for being here, for your time, and wish you all many more IoT days ahead. Thank you so much.